Welcome, Greg. Thanks for joining me today on How I Sell This. It's absolutely wonderful to have you with me.
Thank you. It is a pleasure. It was somewhat of a surprise when I got your call to be able to get on this, and I'm not living in Australia at the moment, but truly honoured to be invited to this. I've listened to a couple of your podcasts. I'm really looking forward to seeing where our conversation leads us.
Excellent. And I do appreciate you joining me because it's evening your time in the US and early in the morning here for me in Melbourne. So I do appreciate you making the time. If you've listened to the podcast, Greg, then you'll know that the purpose of the How I Sell This podcast is to have a chat to top performing salespeople and sales managers like yourself, to uncover what they do that makes them the best amongst their peers. But before we get into all of that, I know you've got this wonderful, rich history in sales behind you. And I think it would be absolutely worthwhile for you to just take a few minutes to walk us through your professional career to date, if that's okay, please.
Absolutely. Well, I guess first off, I didn't start in sales. I started in science and worked in laboratories for a number of years. I realized then that where the ceiling was in that market, in that particular career, and I wanted more. And that more moved me into selling. And I talk about my first selling a little later, but it moved me directly into a face-to-face selling environment for the first time. I picked up a lot of skills within that, and I really wanted to take that selling that I had and combine it with some of the technical stuff that I really loved out of working in science. And that's really what then really my career took off as a result of that. I moved into selling in laboratory. I moved into selling equipment. That allowed me to gain experience, not just within the selling environment, but also leading people. And so over the last few years, or quite a number of years, I've both sold directly and led sales teams in a variety of industries. So I've been in science, I've been in technology, and I've been lucky enough also during that career I did a master's in marketing. So I've been marketing manager at business divisions of Panasonic in Australia, Canon Australia. And for me, that bringing the marketing and sales, it brings a really unique perspective to the career of a seller. I worked twice in the United States. This is my second time. In the 90s, I worked for 6 years living in North Carolina. Started off selling and then ended up running the division. But I don't believe you're ever not selling, regardless of what you do. And I've been in this role here in the US for 6 years, but I've been with CooperVision for nearly 11 years. And so I started in Australia as the national sales manager and moved to general manager, and now moved to the United States in 2018 as the vice president of field sales for CooperVision in the United States.
Wonderful. Thank you. It's almost like where do we start with all of that? But maybe we should start with where you are now and what your role involves now, because Vice President of Field Sales. Can you tell us more about what that role involves day to day?
So my job is to, as I always say to my sales team, my job is to create an environment where you can be more successful. And so that's what I look at. The sales team I have is including managers and divisional managers, around 220 people, I guess. And really, on a day-to-day basis, it's a couple of things. One of the big things that I've been doing since I got here was re-engineering our selling process, our approaches, what good looks like, what we expect, and what standards we hold ourselves to, both as a sales team and the individual members of that sales team. And that's been a tremendous journey. I work very closely with my sales leaders. I have 3 excellent sales leaders in the United States, and I work very closely with those sales leaders. I also travel with sales reps often, calling on ECPs or optometrists. So I spend time in the field. I spend time with the doctors. My view as a sales leader is that unless you're out there seeing what the market's talking about and how they're responding to what you think you are doing right as a leadership team or as a direction, unless you have that direct feedback, you're missing something of immense criticality in where you want to take your team and where you think your team is possible. So on a day-to-day basis, there's of course lots of relationships with cross relationships with marketing and finance and HR. But really my job on a day-to-day basis is to create a successful selling environment, and whatever that takes, whether that's skill, whether that's removing barriers, or whether it's just getting out in the field and working with a salesperson directly.
Wow, I find that quite amazing, really, that you can have 220 people out in the field there's 3 managers underneath you. You must have some more, field managers again.
Yeah, we
go
have.
right down.
I have 3 direct managers and 24 sub managers, 24 regional managers managing the salespeople. Nearly 200 salespeople, and the balance are regional managers and directors of sale.
And so what I find quite impressive is it'd be pretty easy to just sit in the office, right, and rely on the intel that comes to you. I think there's probably plenty of people around the traps that do just that. But, to your point, the only way you really know what's going on at the coalface is to get out there and do it with them.
I never feel more invigorated in my job than after I've spent a day in the field with my sales team. And maybe that's because I started selling, and that's the heart of it. And a very good sales leader in CooperVision once said that everything starts with sales and ends without it. And so that kind of drives some of the philosophy of what it means for me. And that's commonly used in the sales organization at CooperVision. And therefore, if that's how you start, then you have to know how the execution is going. You have to know how doctors are responding, or we call them eye doctors here, how the customer is responding. And hearsay is not good enough.
So what is it about you being out there with the customer that invigorates you?
It's kind of freeing being able to. So one of the great things about being a little further up in the organization is that the salesperson feels like there's certain things they can and can't talk. I can ask some fairly pointed questions, and that kind of frees up a different relationship. But the other thing is just being able to sit down across the table from somebody and have a selling conversation, a market conversation, an understanding of where each of us stand. For me, I find that not just invigorating, but it's such a learning process that you think you know what you know, and you often are mistaken, not largely, but in small doses when you go out and talk to the customer. So, an environment we all, many salespeople strive to be in leadership, and I strove to be in leadership, and leadership, was where I ended up. But at the end of the day, if you forget where you come from and forget what matters and forget that everything happens during a face-to-face interaction, then your sales leadership suffers quite badly.
We're getting right into the nitty-gritty here. I just want to hold this thread for a little bit longer.
Sure.
I totally get the piece around being the level that you are in the organization. It absolutely enables you to ask a different type of question, have a totally different kind of conversation. What is the difference in the questions you can ask versus what your sales people can ask?
The difference is probably twofold. I'm not trying to make the sale. That's not my job. So one of the important things I think when you go out with a salesperson is not to be the super salesman, not to come in and make the sale. And therefore I can listen to what they say, and I can observe the interaction in a way that's quite difficult if you are involved in that interaction. And therefore the questions I ask are more from the observation of a two-way conversation. And that by definition, in my view, takes it to a different level because I'm not actually involved in the initial conversation. So I see the salespersons and hear their responses. I see the doctor or the customer and see and hear their responses. And therefore, I have the breathing space to be able to listen both sides and trigger a different question. The other thing is that I just am in contact with a broader base of all the people in the organization, broader base of people in the market space, different levels of people in the market space. And that affords me some knowledge base that I'm able to ask a question against. And so the sales team often appreciate that, and we'll go back into the car and they say, can I ask that question in the future? And I'll say, sure, you can ask that question in the future. No problem. So they're the two things. I think that ability to be not quite part of it and therefore an observer that allows you to just to be able to step back and say, what would be a great question that perhaps if I wasn't involved in this conversation, I'd love someone to have asked, and then I ask it.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? Taking the pressure valve off, having to get the deal done. Because when you release the pressure on, I've got to progress this opportunity so it's moving towards a sale, release the pressure valve on that so you can ask a different type of question.
I said, and we'll probably talk about that later. And that's one of the things I think that turns you into a better salesperson when you understand that pressure valve doesn't have to be on at all every moment.
Yes, yeah, that you're progressing an opportunity, not trying to close it in every conversation.
Exactly.
So do you see your role then as a bit of a enabler, a bit of a door opener, because you can ask those different kinds of commercial, strategic, marketplace type questions?
Less a door opener and more I'd like the goal of asking the question is to see if there is a new light that turns on in the customer's mind. And so less of a door opener than an idea planter. And I guess that's in my view, great selling requires a challenge, but a challenge is, in my view, something that just takes a person slightly off the path on which they were thinking. And so that's what I like. That's the question I try and ask, is just to let them think in a slightly different way, not necessarily a dramatically different way, but a slightly different fork in the road. And that's what I try and do in that environment, because then that allows the salesperson, it allows the customer to say, wow, that's an interesting thought. It also allows the salesperson to say, so that's what challenging can look like. And so, one of the things that salespeople may not be comfortable with, and we put a new selling process in here, and it has C in it, has challenge in there. And we had long-term selling people, had very long relationships, and helping them understand that challenge is simply about a deviation of thought process, in my view. And so that deviation of thought process can be large and it can be very effective, or it may be small and be just as equally effective, depending on where the purchaser is in their buying cycle.
It's almost like planting a little seed each time you have a conversation to see if it can grow over time to create the change. That might be needed for a buying decision change. Yes. Love it. We could talk about that all day. Can we take a big step back and go right back to when you decided that you wanted to make a change from working in the labs and into selling? When you were first starting out, do you remember what you found most difficult in making that transition?
Sure. Well, I'm going to start off by saying I went into the deep end of the pool straight off. I went into life insurance, commission only.
Right.
As my very first selling with zero.
Did you go hungry a lot?
No, I went okay.
Great.
I went pretty good. Ultimately, I didn't think that was where my passion was in terms of that, but the skill set. So probably the hardest thing initially, it was prospecting, making sure I understood how to prospect, what that looked like. I'm much better at it now than I was then. And so did a lot of cold calling then. And so there was a lot of, at the beginning of the week or the end of the previous week, you would make enough telephone calls to have at least 10 appointments the following week. And you didn't go home until you had those 10 appointments. And so my ability to understand how to network is much better than it was then. But that was really a confronting when you'd never done it before. And probably the other thing was just understanding the selling process is a guideline and not a script. And so when I first started off, I was taking the selling process and I was almost scripting it. And you become, you sound like you're reading or robotic. And so that became for me, because I hadn't sold before and I was following a very strict protocol. When I understood that protocol was a guideline, and that if I wasn't part of the delivery of that guideline and that protocol, then it would sound insincere, robotic, and I would feel uncomfortable every time I delivered it. When I realized that, the delivery became not just better, but the job, the face-to-face became more enjoyable and more of an interaction than the other phrase that I use within my team when we talk about questioning is, you can't just show up and throw up. No. You need to understand the perspective of the person to whom you're speaking before you start speaking in great volumes. And so I have a lot of those sayings, so they may fall in at some stage.
Well, the show up and throw up, I just don't think it works anymore. It might have decades ago, but now it's just, you could be giving someone a heap of irrelevant information and that can just impact credibility, significantly.
Yeah. But in the original, that was kind of how it was when I was starting out. So I did that for a number of years, but I learned a lot. And so it was as deep as the water gets in selling.
So how long did it take you to work that out? And what did you do to uncover that and fix it?
A couple of things. I had some good mentors, but probably the thing I can distinctly remember the day when the realization came to me. I had a very busy day and I had back-to-back calls across eastern Sydney, across the eastern suburbs. And the first call went well, not terrific, as sometimes don't. And then one of my mentors had said to me, when you go in, if you go in feeling like that you are restricted in what you talk about, when you talk to me, this is how you speak. And when I've heard you role play, that's not how you speak. So when you speak and when you interact, imagine that you're interacting with a friend. Imagine you're interacting with somebody with whom you have a relationship. And you didn't always build a relationship in that environment, but have that conversation. Understand that when you speak, you often use your hands, and when you're animated and you move, and free yourself up and make that. And so the second call, that's exactly what I did. And it made a big difference. And then, so I can't remember the date, but I remember distinctly the day, and I walked out of that call and I went, oh my God, I felt the difference. And that was that freeing up of be who you are within the environment that you're working, and you will become more relatable. You'll feel better about what you do, and you'll also look forward to every conversation going forward.
Be your authentic self.
Be your authentic self, exactly. And when you're when you've never sold before, and the first, essentially your training was a folder, and then the first time you did it was actually sitting in front of a live person. Being your authentic self was a long way from my mindset. But when it realized it on that day in Bondi, it changed everything.
Isn't it funny that you can remember exactly where you were in the conversation, a real pivotal moment in your career?
Yep, absolutely.
So I'm going to take it from what you've said so far that you are very passionate about selling, and you really do love selling. And you said before that being out, with customers is invigorating. Role were you in when you discovered that, and that you knew you were going to make a career out of being a salesperson or working with salespeople?
Yeah, interestingly, after I'd finished working in life insurance, I never applied for a job that didn't have selling in it. So I can't remember the time, but if I would look for jobs, and when I looked for a role outside of that, I looked for a selling role in science. And when I had completed that role, I moved into another selling role in science. And then eventually you move into management, if depending on the environment you work in. The deviation from that was when I was lucky enough I have been in general management. I'm often, but always involved in that. The primary deviation around that was when I was in marketing. But I think being a salesperson made me a better marketer, and being a marketer made me a better salesperson.
Without a doubt, I agree with that wholeheartedly. There are so many organizations, and I'm sure you've seen them, where marketing have never worked in sales, but they're asking all of these things of sales. And sales is sitting there pointing the finger at marketing going, you don't know what you're talking about because you never come out in the field and talk to customers. And there's this us and them going on. So there is no doubt in my mind that having sat on either side in both those teams gives much better perspective of both roles and makes you better at both, I would imagine, for sure.
I believe it does. And it certainly stood me in good stead in both those roles, but also as I've moved into general management roles and higher levels of leadership role, where your ability, not just your ability, but the requirement of the role is to be a strong collaborative partner across departments, particularly marketing. It makes a huge difference.
Yeah. Before we really get into your sales management experience and what you're seeing with successful people today, can we just stay for a second on and when you were a salesperson, what do you think were some of the things that you did that made you successful? Because my observation and experience, and it might be different for you, is that the people who are typically doing well in sales are the ones more likely to move into these management roles. It's almost like you've got to have proved yourself that you can do it very well in order for you to prove that you can be a leader of salespeople, which I don't think is necessarily true, because great salespeople don't always make great managers of people. But I'm going to assume, and tell me if I'm wrong, that you did have some of that same trajectory. What was it that you were doing that made you successful when you were selling?
Probably a few things. It's always a few things. It's never one thing. Planning was one thing, and understanding the environment with which I was moving. And so when I'd finished cold calling, I was moving into an environment of healthcare more, but then later on in IT. But understanding the environment or some of the pressures that your prospective customer, client, buyer may have been experiencing, I think is hugely successful. Going in, and therefore that allows you to ask questions that make sense to them. So that preparation work, I think, is super important. And then I'm good at building relationships, and so I've always been really good at building relationships once I allowed myself to be my authentic self. And so that understanding that, they say that people buy from people they trust, and that's true. But I don't think you can trust. My view is you can't trust somebody that you don't like. And
Yeah, I
so
agree.
I think building relationships and being able to then leverage that relationship into asking the tough questions. So relationship, trust, and then being able to ask the questions. One of the things I have experienced is the time spent understanding the customer, where they are, the time spent asking questions, actively listening, really not just listening and waiting for your chance to open your mouth and start talking, allows you to know that person better. And the better you know that person, the more challenging your questions can be and less challenging they feel to the customer.
Right.
And so those things, and I worked hard. I mean, it's, you're not successful in selling if you don't work hard. And, and it's not just about hard work, it's about hard work in the right direction. So understanding your customer, understanding, asking a question, learning how to be able to be quick on your feet, and be able to be flexible in your answering, but building that relationship and then leveraging that relationship. So the relationship not leveraged is not really a relationship; it's a friendship, and that is quite different. And I've known a lot of salespeople who are very successful who say that their customers are their friends, and I respect them for that. That's not me. And so I think that the importance of the relationship is to be trusted, to have strong relationships. But as a salesperson or a sales leader, your responsibility is to your job. And that relationship is something that you can leverage and use for the betterment of both you, but more critically, for the betterment of your customer. And so you're taking them, in my view, never ask a question where you're taking them down a path where they're going to be uncomfortable and you'll have no escape for them.
Yeah, don't take them down a path with a problem that you can't solve.
Exactly. And very rarely ask a question you don't know the answer to.
Yeah.
Or at least anticipate what the answer is likely to be. And so, that's about active listening. I mean, truly active listening.
There's a number of crucial things in there that you've mentioned. Can we circle back on just one for a moment? You talked about working hard. What did that look like for you?
So for me, it was really one of the things that it's staying with a sale for as long as it takes to know whether you're going to be successful or not be successful. And so that's whatever it takes. So if you have to follow up a phone call 150 times, then that's how many times you follow up the phone call. And so for me, working hard is making sure that my prospect book was full when I did prospect. If I was on a call basis, making sure I did more calls than what was expected as the minimum. So if it was 6 calls a day, I would do 8 to 10. And the reason for that was that just gave you the greatest opportunity to build a pipeline that is always being refreshed and renewed. And so, there's a few ways to measure if you are selling against a pipeline, and that is, what your close rate is, what your pipeline is, and what the value of each deal is. And so reviewing those allows you to be better at working. And so it's important when you work hard, not only to be in front of the customer, but work hard at looking at what you're doing. And so, I'm being successful, but someone else may not have been, maybe more successful than you. If you analyze what you're doing, it could be simply not the prospect, but the size of the deal. And therefore, are you restricting your view on what it is? You may have a higher close rate. And so part of the working hard is looking at what you're doing, not just sitting in front of the customer and understanding, reviewing in your head, when I made that call, what did I do well? What did I not do well? And you shouldn't necessarily need a sales leader to sit down and say that to you. And with every call you go into, have an objective. And when you leave that call, test that objective success objectively for yourself, either in the car or having a coffee. And I had intended to do this. I took it like that. Did it work? And so, one of the things about working hard is being your own manager in that sales training thing, and being willing to work out if you can't get it, then being able to have a network of people you can reach out to. But for me, again, it's the plethora of things. It's working on yourself as well as working on what it is you do, and being able to understand early on where the roadblocks are that you need to get around, and not caring how long it takes to get around that roadblock.
So much of this is just music to my ears, because I think the reason I asked you is because I think a lot of people think working hard means being busier or working longer days. You actually didn't mention either of those things. You talked about really specific things that so many people aren't doing. I'm super passionate about sales pipelines. I could spend all day talking about sales pipelines and opportunity progression and average deal size and funnel velocity, all those things. And so I love the fact that you really talked about that thing of what are you doing? Where are you spending your time? Is it the best use of your time? And then the how are you doing it to make sure it's with the best skill, the best questions, the building the trust, the relationships. So many things fit in that category of work hard.
Yeah, I mean, hours are hours. What you put into them is what the hard work is.
But it's not as simple as just doing more activity.
No,
That might be a component. Yeah, well,
it's absolutely a component after you've worked out whether it's the right activity.
Yes. So let's make the jump now into sales management and what you're seeing today. What are some of the challenges you're seeing in this kind of post-COVID environment with salespeople today? Have you seen any real skill change or skill deficiency or real challenges that are happening with people moving into sales, today versus 10 or 15 years ago?
Less COVID, because we work in a market where our customer was desperate to see us face to face again. We worked on the phone for a while, but when we pulled the entire sales team off the road for 4 months, and then re-skilled them to be telephone selling people during that period of time, and then slowly they were able to work back out. So I think probably the biggest thing that taught us is that there is more than one way to sell, and that just because you're not in front face to face with a particular customer, a client, a direction, is that the telephone call doesn't have to be a touch-in. It can be a sell. It can be a step. It can be a progress. It can be what we refer to as a needle-moving conversation. And so I already have an inside sales organization who are very successful. We were able to teach 180 field people that also works. And so that was a real positive out of that ability to pull people off the field, or that requirement to pull people out of the field, and then our skill set that we're able to teach them. So that learning allows us to be able to, when required, touch more people without necessarily having to drive what they refer to in the US as windshield time. And that gives you the opportunity to be better used. But in terms of the time between 15 years ago or so and now, and that is understanding the generational change of the people with whom you're working. And so, one of the things in the company I work at is we have very long tenured people. I have a sales leader this year who's retiring after 30 years with Cooper. I have salespeople who are retiring after 28 years and 25 years. And that was the norm a long time ago. It's not the norm now. So one of the things that when you are recruiting a salesperson now is understanding that you train them as well as you can, you help them as well as you can. They may not start as stay as long, and that's just the nature of the world, and that's perfectly fine. But creating an environment where they can be as productive and as happy as they possibly can be for every minute that they are with you, as early as possible, is something that as a leader and as an organization, you have to take seriously right now. And I think that's going to become more and more required as we move forward. And that is not just are you productive, but have I created an environment where a variety of different people, because I have 200 people, and that's 200 individual people, that each of them feels there is something in this environment that gives back to them, whether they've been with us for 28 years or 2 years. And so that is a slightly different challenge than it was with the Jobs for Life program that 20 years ago used to run. And so that is something we constantly work. We assess our sales team in terms not just of tenure, but in terms of their generational area, what each generation may or may not need, and how we create an environment where the job is rewarding regardless of how you come into it.
So what do you think personally about recruiting when you're recruiting salespeople, recruiting for industry experience versus maybe recruiting for skill and capability? I think most people would agree that we want to try and get both if we can, because that's ideal. But what if you can't? And often you can't. Have you got any thoughts on which way you would lean?
Yeah, sure. I'm a poster boy for the second way. So I've worked
Which is the recruiting for
is,
skill and capability, yeah?
So I have worked in 7 different industries in some sort of selling, leadership, marketing role. And so my view is there's some fundamental things about the person that are inherent to who they are, their ability to learn, their willingness to learn, but their skill set and their ability to adapt their skill set to a new environment is what I look for. And now, if they know the market, then that's really good. And sometimes knowing the market can be a hindrance because they may have to unlearn what they learned in a different company if it's different from what I do here. That's achievable. But at the end of the day, that ability to sell, that ability to be able to do many of the things we spoke about here, and I really look for adaptability. Somebody who is flexible, adaptable, and has proven that they can learn more than one industry. It doesn't have to be hundreds. It doesn't have to be 7 or 8 like me. But I value people who, some of our best sellings didn't start in this industry. And so there are some employers that I look for in people's pasts. And because I know they have great training, I know they build great skills, I know they build great work ethics, and I know they build great flexibility and adaptability in their people. I can teach them, us, not me specifically, but we have a great technical team who can teach you the technical side of it. And also your customers can help you do that as long as you understand what it is. There are some inherent things in you as a salesperson that you can take anywhere that I look for. And as you say, industry experience can be fantastic because what that gives you is contacts. They always take a bit longer to build. In CooperVision, we exclusively, at this stage at least, employ experienced salespeople. So we employ salespeople from a huge variety of industries based on their skill as a selling person.
Okay, so you'd rarely take on a rookie with zero sales experience?
Not here. I have, but not at Cooper. And part of the reason is that we only have 200 salespeople. We have $1 billion budget. And so ramp up time is, it's in the environment in which we have. Once we, the chances are we may end up with a larger sales force, we may not. Learning on the job from scratch is tough in my sales team at the moment.
Yep.
So that's
Can we talk about that for a second, that your onboarding time? Because I think a lot of organizations would have this struggle of how do we onboard people more effectively so that we can get them being productive as quickly as possible. What are some of the things that you do at CooperVision to enable that onboarding period?
We have a specific Salesforce development onboarding team. And so that's all they do. And so we have a dedicated about a 9 or 10 week program. Some of it is learning online. Some of it is learning in person. It's interspersed with being in the field, in your market with your leader. Every new salesperson also has an advisor that's not in their territory who is an experienced salesperson that helps them lead through moving into CooperVision, even if they are experienced in the industry. Everybody has an advisor. They're with that advisor for 6 to 12 months. And so that's a really important part of what we do. We do all of our technical training with a doctor of optometry. We do our selling training with qualified selling trainers, and bringing that together allows us to be able to do the best of both worlds. But specifically in that 9 to 10 week program, there are big chunks of time where you take what you've learned, you go out in the field with your manager, and you practice in a safe environment because your manager's there to rescue you. And then that ability to reach out to an experienced salesperson as often as you want, that experienced salesperson will also travel co-travel with you in your territory as well.
Sounds unbelievably thorough.
It is. And so, you think, well, 9 weeks before they're productive. The reality is if you take that time and do it right the first time, their productivity ramps up much more quickly. And also Their relationship when they first get in front of their customers by themselves, flying solo, is much more rounded.
Yes, less chance that any harm could be done with that level of support leading into that.
It is. But harm to the environment and harm to the ego of the salesperson. And so,
Yeah.
And that's an important, one of the really important things to do with new salespeople, and regardless of their age, that come into your organization, is not create an environment where their initial interaction, either within the company or external to the company, is damaging to our egos, because salespeople have healthy egos, and I think that's super important. And so creating an environment where that's not damaged is really important. Now, will it always be that environment? No. And that's just the way it is. When you get out there, you become self-sufficient with maintaining your ego. In a new role, that's harder.
It really does sound like there's a real commitment to enabling the success of your people. That's kind of what shines through with what you've just described.
Absolutely. So we have turnover. All sales organizations have turnover. But, the value point in creating an environment where more and more people are successful, and it does a couple of things. It does just that. It creates an environment where people trust you, where they believe you. But it also makes you an employer of choice. And so when you have roles, you get good people who apply.
Yes. Yeah, they want to come and work for you. Absolutely. Great. So, Greg, I'm mindful of time. We've talked about so much stuff. What I'm wondering maybe as a final question, given you've had such a successful career, and if there's anyone listening who kind of thinks, I want to be like Greg, he sounds like he's done really well. Are there any secret nuggets that you could offer to those salespeople today, your words of wisdom or advice that you would give?
Interestingly, yeah. So this is going to sound strange. There's a movie called, that I've forgotten the name of it, but there's a line in it that says, never give up, never surrender. And that's part of the philosophical approach that you need. But the other thing is, particularly in selling, we have 2 ears and we have 1 mouth. And using those in that correct proportion is really, really important. And so often listen more than you speak, and seek first to understand before you seek to be understood. And that is not just in selling, but in many things. But probably the carryaway nugget is be who you are, be your natural self, and take whatever selling process you have, and turn it into you, so that when you are sitting in front of whomever the customer is, in whatever environment is, they are feeling like you are a person, and not, oh my God, another salesperson I've got to talk to. And so that, I think, has been the thing for me that has made a big difference. And be willing to step out of the selling process and critique the good things you do, the things you may not be really good at, and seek out a mentor to help you with the stuff that you're not as good at.
I don't know if there's anything to add to that, Greg. That all sounds amazing. Even just what stands out for me there is the belief that sits underneath that. I think what I really hear there is just your passion for selling as a career. Yeah, I think that really comes through in everything you've just said.
And selling is as strong a craft as anything else that we do. And so people say, my craft is, I'm a musician and I work on my craft. Well, I'm a seller and I have a selling organization, and we work on our craft.
Yeah. Yes. I love that. Well, Greg, thank you so much for joining me today and just sharing so many of your insights and observations and your experience as well. I appreciate that sometimes when you're asked these kinds of questions that it's not always easy to talk about yourself in this kind of way. So I do appreciate you being willing to share so much. But what I would like to do before we finish up is I would like to try and summarize some of the key points that you've shared so that people can adopt it into their selling work. And I've taken pages of notes, and I suspect I won't do this nearly as much justice as it deserves, but I shall try. You said something really crucial before that one of your, I think, managers had shared with you, and I love, which is everything starts with sales and ends without it, which is brilliant. Your role as a sales manager is not to be a super salesperson. It's to help plant ideas and to try and help your customers start to think in slightly different ways, challenge in a way that's respectful but is helping the customer start to deviate from their current thought process. You talked about a number of things in regards to what you did that made you a success, things like planning, in particular doing research and understanding the environment that you were working in, and importantly, the pressures that your customers might have been facing, so that you could then ask questions that made sense to them about those pressures, which of course helps you build relationships. But you did mention that you felt like you're someone who can build relationships whilst being your authentic self, which is crucial, because people buy from people they trust and also people they like. And of course, if you've got that trust and that level of relationship, then that enables you to leverage that relationship in an appropriate way, of course, by asking some tough questions. And of course, then actively listening to the responses of those questions is crucial. You talked about working hard, but working hard isn't just about doing more. There's an element, of course, having high activity levels, but it is about being persistent, making sure your prospect book is full, doing more calls than is expected, because if you do that, you're building yourself a pipeline of work that's kind of slightly bigger than you need, and it's always being replenished. Importantly, taking the time to analyze what you do, reviewing what's working, what's not working, making sure you've got clear call objectives, and of course, taking responsibility for your business that you're trying to build. So kind of being your own manager. And then finally, you've wrapped it up with some beautiful things around making sure you be who you are and be your natural self, and work on yourself as well as on what you do. I'm sure I've missed many things, but I might stop there.
You're a pretty good note taker.
I try. Is there anything else you would like to add?
Yeah, I would. Can I just reach into like a topic that's going to continue to come up, and
Please.
that's AI.
Please.
And so I've got a view on AI that I think is going to be tremendously helpful for us, and it kind of goes back to some of the stuff that I talked about. One of the great things about AI is that not just prospecting, but learning about your customer. I talked about researching, and AI is an outstanding resource for researching, understanding the environment, understanding some of the things, understanding what their competitors may be doing, understanding just more in an abbreviated time that you just couldn't do in the past. It would take you for ages. You lots of ways to do it. There'd be internet, and you'd be reading newspapers, and you'd be doing the AI, the ability to use AI as a research tool in that preparation work I talked about, I think is going to revolutionize not just the time of a salesperson in preparing, but the quality of the information delivered and the breadth, because you can ask it another question and ask it another question and ask it another question. And so, as I said, I think it's really important to prepare, and AI, I think, is just going to help us prepare and understand the environment in with which we are going to present ourselves much more completely.
I agree. And I have seen a number of tools that take the work out of the salesperson needing to find, the next prospect to target, because the AI is able to generate, you've got this buyer, Christina, here's another 5 that have the same job title in similar industries, and it's pushing the information to the sales rep, which is
exactly
removing that big obstacle of research that so many salespeople are burdened to do.
Yeah. And then when you find that out, say, tell me everything I need to know about XYZ industries.
Yes. And what are their contact details? Yeah, like this.
What are their contact details? What's their chain of command? Who do they report to?
Yes, I agree. There's so much that's going to or is happening and will continue to happen in that space. Tell me the next step down the chain, though, which is the piece around trying to get a meeting with that customer and having a conversation. If you were to fast forward 5 or 10 years, what role do you think AI will play in that?
I think AI and social media are going to play a role in that. And so I have, for years, I used LinkedIn as a prospecting tool. And so not so much in this role, but in a number of roles, I use that as a prospecting tool. And some of the advancements in things like LinkedIn and in Salesforce.com, where they are including AI within that. And so it may not necessarily the stuff that we do, but our suppliers of technology and our technology stack are leaning strongly into this. And I think that's going to really help us in that environment. And so some of our prospecting tools, and as I said, LinkedIn has been a prospecting tool. Other social media has been a prospecting tool. as they embed AI, I think that the quality and the breadth of the prospecting and the understanding, and then when you link that, if you bring that prospect and you've had that conversation and you put it into something like salesforce.com or an equally complex CRM system that has AI embedded into it, that things like playbook and next step, the next appropriate step in the process, all of that, when it all comes together, and it will continue to come together, I think is going to allow you to be more targeted, more precise, ask better questions, and just show up as what's often referred to as a trusted advisor. And I think AI is going to help us become better trusted advisors.
There's two things there. I met with an organization recently that have an amazing tool for salespeople, and we talked about whether in 5, 6, 7, 8 years, whether you'll even need a CRM, because
it's a great question.
It may actually be superseded.
Yep.
What does it do, though, to the skill? I mean, how I sell this podcast is about what salespeople do that makes them the best. I run a sales training company, which is focused on how to have more effective customer conversations. So the skill that people use. And you've talked a lot about authenticity and understanding your own kind of communication style, if you like. What I have observed is that whether it's COVID, whether it was just generationally, there is a generation of people coming through that have learned to communicate via their phones, text messaging, rather than the verbal communication. So I think we are seeing a deterioration in that skill.
That's true.
Kind of good for me, right? Kind of helps sustain business to a degree. How does AI impact that? If we put more and more reliance on that pre-work planning, research gathering, questions to ask, how might AI impact the quality of the conversation and the authenticity of the salesperson, or does it replace it over time to a point in the sales process?
So a couple of things. I already use ChatGPT for complex communications that are going to be written. And I would encourage most sales people to start to do that. Mm-hmm. And the reason for that is that being able to communicate either via email or by text in a way that delivers complex ideas very simply is really important, because I can deliver you a complex idea over a period of time. You don't get that opportunity. AI can help us refine and say, these are the things that I'm trying to get across, but I want to deliver it in a text message. Help me understand how to do that. So that, I think, is an important part of this. So we aren't, how we text and how we write often reflects who we are. And so, but if you're trying to put a complex, maybe even abstract view, I can sit and write on a whiteboard with you, and I can do that. If you don't have that opportunity, then AI can help you build those particular communications, written communications, if you use it correctly. Now, will people be replaced? That's going to be dependent on the people to whom you're selling. And so that's why I talked about that generationally and the adaptability of a salesperson. The ability to be able to communicate to people whose preference is to communicate by text, but in a way that's effective. And the ability to the next person you talk to who wants to see you by face-to-face have just as effective is what I think the inherently long-term skill of a salesperson will be. And that is adapt the communication to the person on the other side. And if that's all text, that's all text. But if it's the majority of text and at some stage you still get a person who is generationally different and say, I want to see you, have that skill set as well. Have both. Have them at the ability to be able to switch as you require based on the prospect's preferences.
It's so interesting. I mean, we could get people around a table and debate this for hours, because I don't know, can you sell email or sell via text?
You can buy via text, which is not the same thing.
Yes, exactly. I feel like the text or an email supports the selling process, but Correct. It can't ever replace it. But again, could be me generationally just not keeping up with the times, right? Showing my age is that I do feel like at some point, particularly in complex buying environments, at some point there has to be numerous conversations, and email, text messaging can support those conversations, I feel, to progress opportunities, but I don't ever feel like they can replace it.
And
But again,
buyers now will do a lot of prep work on what's available. So they are much more informed.
yes.
And so when you present to them, you have to be tighter and know, I think, inherently that you're walking into a much more informed environment. And part of that is them using AI. And therefore, that preparation is why the preparation on your side is even more critical, because good buyers will do a lot of market investigation. They will know your product almost as well as you do before you walk in.
Yes.
And so the great part about that is that they will present questions for you that will challenge you, and how well you answer those will hold you in good stead. But the other thing is that you can then, if they know enough about it, you can ask them questions about how they would see it fitting into their environment, rather than telling them what it is and putting the onus back on them, as start to them think about, well, now if I'm a user, what does that look like? And then that becomes your job as a seller to contextualize the information they have.
You're right. I saw some research recently about buyer progression, and just in the last 5 years, how much further buyers are progressing before they're engaging salespeople. And it is quite late in the process before they want to talk to salespeople, because they can get so much information without us.
They can. And that's that giving them context of how your organization and their organization will be successful together. And I think context makes a huge difference, because one thing online information gathering does not give you is context.
Yes. And I think it also speaks to, and I think marketers everywhere will love this and have taught me this, is that it puts a greater emphasis on your branding and positioning strategy. Because if the buyer's getting further through the journey before they want to contact a salesperson, when they decide to contact a salesperson, we need to be positioned so that they contact us. And if your marketing team isn't doing that branding and positioning work, then the buyer doesn't think of us when they need to.
Yeah. So the conversation to have with your marketing team is, how are you supporting our asynchronous selling model?
Yep. Exactly.
That's what it comes to, because it isn't an asynchronous selling model, and it'll become more and more asynchronous. And as you say, the salesperson will still be involved, but later in the piece. So it's a much more organizational focused position in selling than it is just marketing.
And it's not short-term marketing, which I think is a flaw, is that we do these short campaigns, ad hoc things here and there, and we think that that is enough to get positioned. And it just doesn't work like that anymore, because it's not sustained. There's too much information. There's too many competitors, that the short ad hoc activities don't help keep you positioned, so that when the salesperson does come in, it hasn't been consistently enough over time for the salesperson.
And consistency is the right word. Consistently strong message delivery that is able to be, the marketing thing of someone needs to hear something 7 times before it sticks, and it's even more critical in this fast moving information environment.
Via
and it's the same for the
channels.
Salesperson. So the first time I tell you something, if I assume that you're going to remember that after you've spoken to 20 other salespeople and spent the last 6 weeks doing your actual job, I have to remember that just because I told you last time. It's up to me to help you remember, not you to help you remember.
Yeah, via a number of mediums, not just
Correct.
verbally or in email.
Yeah.
Goodness, what a big topic that is.
It is, isn't it? Yeah, it's like a whole new topic. But at the end of the day, we're all selling in one way or another, regardless of what our job is.
And I think these are important conversations to have, so that we are staying on top of the shift that needs to be made, because so much stuff is changing constantly.
Absolutely.
Greg, thank you so much. I need to let you go so you can go and have your dinner and finish your working day, and I can get started with mine. I've loved chatting to you. I'm so grateful that you agreed to spend some time with me today. So thank you so very much.
It's been wonderful. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.